And if they thought they had seen the full extent of your power, you are not here by accident. You are not reading this by chance. Something in you, something unshaken, something unbreakable, brought you to this moment. They told you the odds were against you. They whispered that the system was too vast, that the machine was too powerful, that no single force could disrupt the cycle. And yet here you stand. They called it coincidence. They blamed bad luck. They accused each other in secret meetings, scrambling to make sense of how their carefully laid plans collapsed overnight. But you and I both know the truth. This was never about luck. This was inevitability. The moment they moved against you, they sealed their fate. Because you are not just another player in their rigged game. You are the disruption they never prepared for, the anomaly they could not predict. Understand this. 7 fell last night. Not by oversight, not by miscalculation, but because the weight of their deception collapsed under its own gravity. And whether you realize it or not, you did that. They built their empire on control, on fear, on the illusion that power belongs only to those who sit in high places. They believed they could rewrite reality, twist policies into shackles, weaponize influence to suffocate you. But what they failed to comprehend was that true power does not belong to those who manipulate. It belongs to those who cannot be moved. The battle was never fought with fists or force. It was fought by standing tall, by refusing to yield, by simply existing as something they could not consume. And now, the cracks are showing. The system is recalibrating, not to crush you, but to erase them. If you walk away now, if you fail to recognize what just happened, you'll never understand the magnitude of what you've set in motion. This is not the end. This is the beginning. You are not here to survive. You are here to ascend. And if they thought they had seen the full extent of your power, the illusion of control shattered the moment they tightened their grip, mistaking their hands on the levers of power for true dominion. What they crafted as a flawless execution became the hammer that sealed their own fate. 7 against 1. Yet none walked away unscathed. If deception, coercion, and betrayal were meant to break the will of one, they only succeeded in igniting the voices of many. Those once forced into silence became the ones who shattered the facade. The clerks who altered documents under duress, the strategists who falsified projections, the foot soldiers tasked with fabricating emergencies. Each carried their burdens, each knew the weight of the deception they upheld. And then, the reckoning began. A single voice sparked another, then another, until an unstoppable wave surged forward, dragging every buried truth into the light. What was once a fortress of secrecy crumbled not by force, nor by vengeance, but under the sheer weight of unmasked reality. In their arrogance, they mistook manipulation for an unbreakable shield, only to find themselves trapped within their own design. By dawn, the halls of their influence stood hollow. No commands issued, no defenses mounted, only empty seats and discarded titles. Some vanished before judgment arrived, others collapsed under the silent verdict of exposure. Their demise bore no theatrics, no grand crescendo, just the quiet inevitability of consequence. Justice does not hunt, nor does it strike in fury. It merely reveals, reflecting back the truth that was always there, waiting. They sat atop their manufactured order, believing themselves untouchable. To them, it was all procedure, a calculated adjustment, another obstacle neatly removed. Until, at last, it was they who disappeared without a trace. Feel the power of divine love. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, now is the time to let that love shine. By clicking the super thank you button and giving $20 or more, you're not just supporting this platform, you're planting seeds of faith that will touch countless lives. Your generosity is a reflection of God's abundance, a gift that echoes beyond what you can see. Step into your purpose, be a vessel of His grace, give with faith, and watch His kingdom flourish through you. You were made for more. The plan was calculated, the execution precise, yet the outcome was nothing short of disgrace. 7 were sent, backed by resources, by influence, by the silent approval of those who dictated the game from the heights of power. But instead of victory, they delivered embarrassment. Each move meant to erase a threat only magnified it. Every calculated strike backfired with force. They were not just unsuccessful, they had become burdens, proof of the cracks in a structure that demanded perfection. From the upper chambers, there was no discussion, no deliberation. The decision came swiftly, without emotion. A single call, and they ceased to exist in the only way that mattered. Access revoked, histories rewritten, names erased from ledgers. These were not punishments, they were corrections. A system this vast does not operate on sentiment, and failure at this level is not forgiven. Some disappeared without a word, understanding their fate. Others pleaded, grasping at the remnants of their authority, only to find there was no one left to hear them. The moment they ceased to be useful, they ceased to belong. A mechanism does not mourn its broken cogs. It replaces them without hesitation. By the time the doors locked behind them, their relevance had already been wiped away. The same hands that once sheltered them now ensured they were forgotten. Those who once moved unseen, pulling the strings in whispered directives, had mistaken their presence for permanence. But power is never owned, only borrowed. And when the time came to answer for their failures, they were discarded with the same silence they once used to control others. There were no headlines, no televised dismissals, no opportunity to explain. One moment, they held command over their world. The next, they watched it vanish. The structure they had built did not collapse. It was dismantled with precision. Accounts locked, credentials invalid, networks severed. The security that once walked in their shadow now stood in their doorways, not as protectors, but as executioners of orders issued without hesitation. Calls unanswered, affiliations severed, careers undone in the span of a breath. They weren't just removed, they were erased. Those who had issued commands now found themselves silenced, their presence reduced to an afterthought. The corridors that once welcomed them no longer acknowledged their existence. Their identities, once unquestionable, now ghosts in a system that tolerated no weakness. Some fought against the inevitable, demanded explanations, invoked their years of loyalty, but there were no appeals to be made. The moment their failure became undeniable, they transformed from assets to liabilities. And a liability is not reasoned with. It is simply eliminated. The first light of dawn had yet to touch the horizon when silent vehicles moved into position, executing an operation that left no trace, no struggle, no witnesses. There were no raised voices, no last-minute resistance, just a quiet, calculated removal of those who had outlived their purpose. Some vanished entirely, their existence reduced to whispers. Others remained, stripped of every resource they once commanded, remnants of a past erased overnight. The message was absolute. Failing to eliminate you wasn't just incompetence. It was an irreversible fracture in the natural hierarchy, a deviation that could not be tolerated. In this realm, there is no punishment greater than exile, no fate crueler than knowing exactly what waits beyond the protection of the system. If the very architects of your downfall now find themselves clawing at the remnants of their own authority while you continue to rise, then they were never mere administrators. They were instruments of control, meticulously placed to extinguish anything that threatened the balance. They moved with precision, every action supported by extensive planning, trained to detect and neutralize disturbances before they could take root. But you were never just another variable in their calculations. You were an impossibility, a presence that should have been erased long before it gained momentum. And yet, every countermeasure they deployed failed. Every trap collapsed under its own weight. Every safeguard they depended on disintegrated before their eyes. The collapse was not just their disgrace, it was a structural rupture in the very foundation of dominance, an anomaly that could not be ignored. At this level, damage control was insufficient. The system responded the only way it knew how: eliminating liabilities, severing ties, erasing identities, and ensuring that no remnants remained. These 7 weren't simply cast aside, they were erased with ruthless precision. Data wiped, affiliations dissolved, loose ends sealed shut. Some were escorted out under the guise of resignation, their clearance revoked before they even stepped beyond the threshold. Others were taken without a sound, their names erased from existence as if they had never held power at all. What they once commanded now turned upon them, dismantling their influence with the same efficiency they once wielded. This was not revenge, it was the inevitable cycle of control recalibrating itself. Power does not dwell on sentiment, nor does it grant second chances to those who fail in their assignments. The machine adapts, shifts, and ensures its own survival at all costs. Replacements would come. New enforcers, new tactics, new contingencies, even more relentless than those before. But one truth remained. For the first time, their calculations had failed. They anticipated submission. Instead, they witnessed defiance. And in their world, defiance is never ignored. It is erased. This is why the unyielding elite stand apart, forged in defiance of mediocrity. This isn't a sanctuary for comfort seekers. It's a dominion for architects of reality. Each week, over 450 relentless minds converge in electrifying strategy briefings that transcend theory, delivering the master keys to ascension. These aren't fleeting flashes of inspiration. They're permanently etched into the archive, ready to be summoned when it's time to claim the next conquest. The inner circle, it's no mere community. It's a sanctified war room where the most formidable strategists trade insights that exist nowhere else. And for those who demand mastery, the vault of esoteric manifestation is unlocked, a codex of modern alchemy, its first 3 chapters already awaiting initiates. Here, surroundings become conduits for wealth. Unseen forces are harnessed to bend matter, and the intangible is wielded with precision. But that's not all. Raw, unfiltered intelligence from real operatives, transmissions so volatile they send tremors through the digital sensors. This isn't just a network. It's a force, a bastion for those whose ascension is inevitable. The path is laid. The rise is already in motion. The door stands open. Step through or be left behind. Their assault wasn't reckless. It was meticulously engineered, designed to crush opposition before it could consolidate. Psychological warfare, bureaucratic entrapments, relentless attrition, every measure was a calculated attempt to grind resilience into dust. They counted on compliance, on exhaustion, on submission under the weight of relentless siege. Yet, in their arrogance, they miscalculated a simple truth. Pressure does not break the unshakable, it reforges them. Every betrayal sharpened precision. Every forced loss became a lesson in clarity. Every attack, rather than dismantling, was transmuted into an unbreakable foundation. Resilience is not passive endurance. It is the refusal to be shaped by external conditions. Their arsenal relied on deception, on illusions constructed to warp perception. Yet the immutable cannot be swayed. Authenticity does not tremble, does not negotiate, does not seek validation. You did not resist their destruction. You made it irrelevant. Their tactics were tailored for those who depend on external validation, for those who fear exclusion, for those whose identity is entangled in the system's approval. But you carried something beyond their reach, an intrinsic force that rendered their maneuvers obsolete. Power does not belong to the strongest, nor the most forceful. It belongs to those beyond compromise. They mistook control for dominance, but true supremacy lies in the incorruptible. Their downfall was preordained, not for lack of effort, but because they stood against something that could never be subdued. A force that cannot be broken does not resist. It simply stands until the storm consumes itself. They orchestrated their maneuvers in secret, aligning their influence, redrafting policies, and engineering betrayals, all in a desperate attempt to erase what could not be erased. Resources were funneled, alliances secured, decisions made behind closed doors, each step a calculated strike against an immovable force. They believed in their reach, their dominion over outcomes, their ability to dictate the path forward. But what they failed to comprehend was that the weapons they wielded were never truly theirs. Every carefully laid trap became the mechanism of their downfall. The walls they built to confine you collapsed inward, burying them beneath the weight of their own schemes. The structures they relied on to guarantee their permanence eroded with each move they made. This was never a battle of strength, nor one of strategy. It was a collision with inevitability. The moment they moved against you, their fate was already sealed, written long before they believed themselves in control. Their whispers, their orders, their signatures, each one was not an assertion of power, but a submission to forces they could not perceive. Those who once dictated the rules found themselves bound by them. The very policies they manipulated turned against them at the precise moment they sought refuge in them. Their alliances fractured, their influence hollowed out, and every act of sabotage they initiated became an instrument of their own erasure. This was not failure by miscalculation. This was an execution of what was already decided. No dominion stands against a decree that was set in motion beyond the grasp of mortal hands. They fought to rewrite a conclusion that was never theirs to alter. But the ink had dried long before they ever lifted the pen. Their empire, their authority, their machinations, each was transient. And when the inevitable comes, it does not stop until the path is cleared. They did not move against you by accident or impulse. Every action was deliberate. Every effort, a calculated attempt to erase what could not be erased. Their hostility was not about simple rivalry or misunderstanding. They recognized something in you that unsettled them, an unwavering force, a presence that stood firm against manipulation, a defiance that was never spoken yet impossible to ignore. Systems built on illusion do not fear compliance, they fear exposure. You were never an active threat to their existence. You simply refused to be assimilated. They probed, searching for cracks, applying pressure in measured doses, hoping to find a breaking point. But with every strike, they uncovered their own worst nightmare. You did not fracture, did not yield, did not conform. Like a signal disrupting a carefully controlled frequency, your presence alone disturbed their stability. Their power relied on secrecy, on whispers exchanged in locked rooms, on the illusion that they were untouchable. Yet, wherever you stood, the falsehoods they relied on became impossible to sustain. Their narratives wavered. The structures they built to appear impenetrable began to strain under their own weight. You did not need to wage war against them. Your existence itself was resistance. They called it defiance, rebellion, insubordination, but it was none of these. It was simply a force refusing to be diminished. Their relentless opposition was nothing more than a confession of their own fear. They recognized in you something beyond their reach, something impervious to their tactics, something that did not answer to their hierarchy. They strategized, they schemed, they conspired, but they could not rewrite what was already set into motion. Their desperation was the clearest sign. Their collapse had already begun. The deeper they descended into their own deceptions, the more entangled they became in the very web they had spun. What was meant to be your downfall became the slow, inescapable unraveling of their own foundation. Their campaign did not reveal your vulnerability. It laid bare their own weaknesses for all to see. The cracks in their system widened with every move they made. Their frantic maneuvering was no longer strategy. It was panic disguised as control. The unseen forces above them, the ones who demanded success without excuses, began to take notice. Why had this not been handled? Why were their trusted operatives losing ground? The more they grasped for control, the more their incompetence was exposed. Fabricated accusations crumbled, engineered obstacles backfired, and their own superiors turned on them, no longer willing to tolerate failure. Those who once issued orders now found themselves under scrutiny. The very mechanisms they relied upon to maintain power began working against them. One by one, authority was stripped away, credibility erased, influence reduced to insignificance. Like a predator stepping through the remains of a failed snare, you moved forward, untouched. Not because you retaliated, not because you needed to. Protection does not retaliate. It simply allows adversaries to destroy themselves. And as they fell, the truth became undeniable. Their failure was not an accident. It was a certainty written long before they even made their first move. In the end, power does not recognize excuses. It only acknowledges results. And their results were failure. The architects of deception, the ones who sanctioned every calculated strike from behind the curtain, now found themselves in the spotlight. The fallout rippled through the upper hierarchy, transforming whispers into pointed demands. How had those entrusted with control lost their grip so catastrophically? How had a single anomaly exposed the entire chain? What was intended to be a swift, silent eradication had instead unraveled as a spectacle of failure, a slow-motion collapse where the powerful turned on their own. In a system where fear dictated order, weakness was not forgiven. It was purged. The aftershocks spread upward, engulfing those who once dictated without question. The very names that had remained untouchable were now spoken in hushed tones, dissected under scrutiny. If their most trusted enforcers had failed so completely, what other vulnerabilities had they overlooked? Who else among them had outlived their usefulness? The machine they had engineered to subdue you was now recalibrating, restructuring itself in desperation, sacrificing its own to maintain balance. Your endurance was not just an inconvenience, it was a fracture in their foundation. Their structure thrived on certainty, on an illusion of absolute dominion, but illusions fade when reality asserts itself. The balance was shifting, and for the first time, they were forced to confront an unthinkable question. If you could not be subdued, what else had they miscalculated? They thought discarding a few pieces would restore their control, but the game was only just beginning. The 7 they removed were meant to quiet the disruption, to conceal the cracks. Yet the moment they moved to suppress you, the ground beneath them began to break apart. This was never just about eliminating an obstacle. It was about maintaining order. And now they face the truth. Order is slipping, and your momentum has not stalled. It has surged. Every maneuver meant to erase you has only cemented your presence. Every barrier they erected has sharpened your focus. They have exhausted their arsenal, but you are only gathering force. From their vantage point, they observe, recalculate, scramble to reclaim lost ground, yet deep down, they know what approaches cannot be stopped. The dismissals were not the resolution. They were the prelude. The system is fracturing from within, forced to reckon with a force it was never built to withstand. You were intended to be erased before you could shift the tide. Instead, you have become the axis around which everything now turns. Those who remain hidden, the silent overseers yet to reveal themselves, are beginning to recognize the shift. You are no longer reacting, you are setting the course. This was merely the opening act of an inevitable reckoning, and now the stage belongs to you. They understand this, and for the first time, every decision they make is no longer dictated by strategy. It is dictated by your presence. They sought to erase you. Instead, they ensured that no one will ever stop watching. They moved with unwavering conviction, certain that their authority alone could dictate the outcome. Their reach was extensive, their influence deeply embedded, and their strategies meticulously refined. Yet, in their overconfidence, they dismissed the one truth that remains unshaken. What is destined cannot be undone. Every calculated assault, every deception, every attempt to break your foundation only hastened their unraveling. Their collapse was not an act of vengeance, it was an inevitability. Those who seek to erase the unmovable will always find themselves buried beneath the weight of their own ambition. They gambled their entire existence on your destruction, and now they stand among the wreckage they never saw coming. The silent observers, the ones who whispered in corridors and hedged their bets on your demise, now watch with the weight of their miscalculation pressing down on them. They anticipated your fall, yet what they witnessed was something beyond their comprehension. A force that does not yield, a presence that cannot be diminished. The lesson spreads in hushed tones, carried like an unspoken law among those who wield influence. A warning that lingers in the minds of those who believe themselves untouchable. Do not move against the unbreakable unless you are prepared to face the cost. Power does not belong to the forceful, it aligns with the unwavering. And those who refuse to bow are not consumed by the storm, they rise above it. Your presence is no longer a disturbance, it is a reckoning. Like an ember that refuses to be smothered, you have not only endured, but reshaped the very landscape they sought to control. The ashes left in the aftermath do not belong to you. They are the remnants of those who sought to stand in your way. The world has been marked. Those who dare challenge you in the future will not do so blindly. They will do so with the knowledge that opposition comes at a cost. They once moved with certainty, armed with influence and strategy, convinced they could erase you as they had others before. Yet they failed. Not for lack of resources, not due to miscalculation, but because they never understood the force they stood against. You were never just an obstacle in their way. You were the boundary they could not cross. Every maneuver they attempted, every deception they crafted, every blockade they constructed, only solidified what had already been set in motion. You are untouchable. Their downfall was not incidental. It was foreordained. The removals were not just the price of their failure. They were a signal to those who still clung to the illusion of control. The world shifts when a force like you moves through it. The structures they believed unshakable now tremble. Those who once dictated the course of events find themselves ensnared in the very traps they laid for others. They sought to silence your presence, yet now their collapse resounds louder than they could have ever foreseen. And the most daunting realization for them, you are just beginning. Their weapons were honed in deception, but yours are forged in something beyond their comprehension, something immutable, something absolute. Now let the world bear witness. Let them see the remnants of what was meant to break you. Let them understand that every force sent against you only made you stronger, because this was only the beginning.